Okay, could you let me know your official title for the purposes of this story?
Attorney Chris Garcia, an
Okay.
immigration attorney.
And do you prefer Chris instead of Christopher?
Sure, Chris.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about what your office has seen since, the start of Donald Trump's campaign all the way up until his winning of the election, and more importantly, the promises of mass deportation.
A lot of panic. A lot of my clients have been asking a lot of questions about what to expect when President-elect Trump is in office. And so it's hard to address that question because we know that he's announced a mass deportation, but we don't know the execution of that. We don't know the specifics. So what happens is my clients that are in deportation proceedings or pending residency are very, very worried and very, very concerned.
And so, in terms of legality, as far as you understand, what scope does the presidential authority have to carry out these mass deportations?
Well, he can make an executive order with respect to the mass deportations. The issue is, and it's more of a federal issue, and so you see it on the news all the time with the current President Biden when he would make a change, for example, DACA. It went through the federal courts, and so the president does have authority. The issue is a federal issue. And I suspect with the mass deportations, we're going to have some federal litigation and some injunctions with respect to the administration of that policy.
And just for my understanding and for our viewers too, how does this work? Do they go door to door just asking people their immigration status? How do you round up what they're alleging is that many people?
So I don't know how you round up so many people. Of course, in immigration law, you have immigrants that have made some bad choices and have criminal proceedings and what have you. But I really wouldn't, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to be knocking on doors. I'm not very sure. I don't think they have the manpower to even do that. And so uh, we don't really know how they're going to execute a mass deportation.
And I'm imagining that the clients you deal with aren't just people who have come across the border illegally, as you said. So why is it so dangerous that there's a rhetoric going around that the only immigrants are these dangerous criminals who are ruining the United States?
I think what happens is I think sometimes when you're not in the front lines and you don't see what's actually going on, you have this perception of people coming across are bad people or the undocumented immigrants that are currently in the United States are bad people. But what I've seen in my field in my profession is there's some hardworking people out there. I'm in the deportation courts and the immigration proceedings majority of the time, and these are good people but just found themselves in immigration proceedings. So I think there's a false perception. And if you're not in the front lines and you don't see what's actually going on, you're going to get some sort of false impression.
So the first word that you used when we started having this conversation is panic, and that you've seen a lot of panic. What does that look like for your office? Is that like an influx of clients? Is it a rush of phone calls?
It's a rush of phone calls. It really is, and it's a rush of client meetings. And so it really is very difficult to talk to clients and give them assurance because I mean, President-elect did say mass deportation, and it's a general term, and because we don't know the specifics, it's causing a panic around among my clients, I believe.
So, as I told you just before we started this interview, I've spoken with a woman who is going through the process of what has been called the right way of going around immigration, and her paperwork hasn't necessarily been approved yet. So, what happens if it's still in limbo by the time President-elect Trump is in office?
That's a very good question, and I can't give a definitive answer. What I think is, I don't believe, and I would think it would be unconstitutional to deport one who has a adequate form of relief before immigration. I believe the person you were talking to is probably doing a process through USCIS, and so I don't believe that that person should necessarily be deported. But again, like I mentioned earlier, I don't see Trump's plan of action or President-elect Trump's plan of action being immediately executed because I believe there'll be some federal lawsuits and injunctions with respect to his policy.
And one of the big key issues that we're talking about is family separation. There are, undocumented immigrants who have come over, they have children who have birthright citizenship. What does that look like? Do they have to leave their children here? Do they want to take them?
That's a good question. I mean, you can't deport a United States citizen, and that's what's complicated. I would suspect. I mean, we have clients where both parents are undocumented and they have minor children. I think there would be a psychological effect, number one, to that. Number two, if the parent decides to leave the child behind here in the United States, do they become does the state take custody of the child? We don't know. But most definitely, I know 100% that you can't deport a U.S. citizen. And so it is a good question. It's hard to answer because every family is different. You may have one U.S. citizen, mom or father, or and the other person is an undocumented immigrant. And so, at least in that situation, the child will probably stay with the USC parent. But what if you have two undocumented, and that's what I believe is causing a little bit of a panic.
In your professional opinion, are you afraid of seeing a repeat of what we saw in the 2016 to 2018 era where we start seeing ICE raids and children in cages? Is that a fear of yours?
Yeah, I think the fear, absolutely. Number one, yes. The answer to your question is yeah. I think there's a fear that we're regressing with respect to the immigration policies. We as practitioners, we know there's an immigration problem. We know that there's an immigration problem with respect to the laws, and there needs to be a change. There needs to be a fix. But there has to be a common sense approach, and I believe that we may get a repeat of 2016.
And I know you said there's no right way to comfort your clients because there's just so many things that are unknown. So, what is your office doing to take in the influx and all the panic that you're seeing?
Well, we're talking. We're talking. I mean, we're not just giving a 2 minute conversation. Don't worry about it. Wait until the federal courts issue an injunction. Wait until the lawsuits. We're actually talking this through. There's a lot of questions that people ask. What's going to happen to my kids? Do I have to take my kids? There's just a lot of questions asked, and we just take our time in talking to them and try to walk them through scenarios essentially. But at the end of the day, it's hard because you don't want to give one false hope where you tell one everything's going to be okay because we really don't know. We really don't know.
And wrapping up here, Chris, what would you say if someone sees this interview and they're having these feelings of unsureness? What would you say to them?
I would say that there is a process, and the process is there's a litigation process. But I would say contact an immigration attorney, and I would say consult with them. But at the end of the day, just know that President-elect Trump can issue an executive order. But remember something: there are attorneys out there that are fighting. They're fighting for the undocumented immigrant, and understand that there is a federal system that allows for us practitioners to litigate and possibly put a stop to this quote unquote mass deportation. And so, what I would tell one is to wait, wait until he comes into office and see what actually happens, because I can tell you that I'm more than sure that it's going to end up in the federal courts.
Okay, and is there anything else that you would like to say or add that maybe I haven't asked you?
No, I think you covered a good broad spectrum of the issue. I feel really bad for the undocumented immigrants and for their children, and hope that this mass deportation doesn't happen.
Okay.